How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. Yeah. Fist in the air while clutching the cross, indicative that the plot has been lost, indicative of not counting the cost. You claim to believe while trying to floss, with ill-gotten gains, extortion at best, demanding that man be made to caress your ego and pride, or suffer arrest, or be paid a visit by the IRS. Ain't none of that Christian, in fact it's Christless. How dare you sashay and say with your chest that you love the poor, but yet you outsource benevolence to the state? Of course. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. Yeah. Who would've thought that blasphemy pays? Scratch itch ears with iatrogenic blaze. The social gospel just can't penetrate all of the sin we each propagate. Redistribution cannot pay the wage, and no social justice can never repay. We only end up with a nation of slaves, rebuilding the Tower of Babel for days. For all have fallen and destined for graves, but oh thank the Lord that Jesus Christ saves. Is gospel acceptable wage for our debt when we look for others we're spiritually dead? How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor.
Hello, everybody, and thank y'all for joining the live stream this evening. I'm having trouble right now connecting to Patreon. Whenever we went live, it went live everywhere except for Patreon, so bear with me as I try to figure this out. In the meantime, I'm going to bring up my good friend, Chuck Littleton. How are you today, Chuck?
Oh, man, I'm doing well, man. Glad to see you. Glad to talk to you again. It's been a long time, man.
Yeah, it's been a hot little minute, as the Blacks say.
Yeah.
Let me try to figure this out real quick.
For
some reason it didn't go live on my my deal here.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can try to channel it in. I'm so sorry, guys. Like it's something always has to go awry, like it wouldn't be a Chad O. Jackson live stream if something didn't mess up or glitch or what have you. So that means that only means we're doing something right here. Okay, let me do this now. Then let me do that. And then we'll call that take 2. And then let's see if that works. All right, so I just added that server. Boom. Did that work or nah? Let's see if it worked. Come on. I don't know why Patreon is such a clunky app. I mean, the concept of it is good,
Mm-hmm.
um, but for some reason, like it just can't keep up.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
know that.
okay.
I know I'm maybe speaking language you don't quite.
Oh, no, because when I would use Patreon, I mean, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's not user friendly, but there are some issues with it, even on the user side. So
Yeah, it's just
I,
not a very user friendly app. Like the user experience is very poor. Even
yeah,
the way that they organize like all of your videos, it should be where like people can just go to episode or season 1 and have all of the seasons or episodes for season 1 categorized into that one. Season
hmm
2, all the episodes for season 2 categories and categorized into that one. All of the live streams categorized, somewhere else. So everything looks clean, easy to click and navigate through. But
yeah,
like even when you try to comment, like it's weird. Like I don't. It's just not. They just need some reinforcements over there at Patreon. So,
yeah.
um, anyway,
Hopefully it gets better. Hopefully, I don't know how long Patreon has been around, but
they've
you
been
know,
around for a good little minute.
oh yeah, well,
Oh yeah.
they need to hurry up. They need to come on with it before somebody else innovates some out of innovates some out of business.
I mean, it's a good concept. I mean, it's like the media version of Substack, where
Right.
your most loyal supporters who don't mind paying a monthly fee to get exclusive content on Substack. If you write articles that you don't have to go through like a publication medium, you write direct to your audience, and they just pay you a monthly subscription fee. Same scenario with Patreon. If you're doing video content,
Right.
people who want to support the work that you're doing can pay you a monthly fee to keep
Mhm.
going. But I just wish it wasn't so dang clunky. Is my only thing of an app. Like every time I try to go live, it says this page could not be found. Like, what is that? So I might just have to forget about Patreon for now and just continue with the live stream and then just upload it there later. So I know a lot of people are going to be disappointed because they were anticipating watching on Patreon tonight. But yeah, I mean, I can spend 30 minutes trying to deal with this or just get right on with it. So I guess I'm going to choose the latter. Anyway, I'm just going to exit out of that. Am I coming through clear? Because last time I tried to go live, like the video was very blurry and I didn't realize till the end of the live stream.
Oh, yeah, you coming through clear for me. I don't
Oh,
know about the YouTube audience, but no, Streamline or StreamYard is coming through pretty good.
somebody said I need more light. No, I kind of like the dark look, the dark look.
Yeah, man. Bruce Wayne over there, man, chilling in the back cave.
So
Yeah.
Chuck, it's been a long time since you and I have done a live stream. What's new with you?
Nothing, man. Just life. Life is life, and right. Just sitting back and watching you actually watching you make your rounds and different podcasts and interviews and things like that. Really enjoying a lot of what you've been doing. But yeah, man, for me, nothing major.
I'm just trying to
Mutual
do like Jesse Jackson, just keep hope alive, keep hope
hope
alive.
alive, man. That's right. Yes, sir. As far as social media goes, I've just really been, our mutual friend Keisha King has been doing a lot of, live streams, and I help her out with her live streams coming on, and she's really getting off into doing a lot of debates on the issues of the social gospel and things of that nature and Black liberation theology, and so I've been doing some collaborating with her. She asked me to kind of help her really kind of refine her knowledge and her debate strategies and tactics and talking points when it comes to these particular issues. And so, you can catch me a lot over there recently.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm just really just just kind of basking in the success and just the feeling of finality, as far as the MLK Project is concerned, and just looking forward to what the future has to offer, man.
Yeah.
It's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I've been watching some of the content that you and Keisha have been doing. It's been really good. And I say more power to y'all because I quite don't like debates, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know, I know, man. But hey, it is what
Somebody's
it
got to do it, I
is.
guess.
I guess so. Somebody. I try to. I mean, like I said, I lend a hand whenever I can. Sometimes I try to stay clear, but sometimes I just can't. I can't walk away from a good fight. So
Yeah, that's that Detroit in you.
yeah, it is. Bro.
Speaking
Yeah,
of
it is.
debates, so your friend Austin Broughton,
My
Austin off
friends,
script.
yeah.
Did he ever reach out to you, by the way?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge, he hasn't. Let's. Maybe I may have missed it.
Does he not want the smoke, as the blacks say?
I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, to me, he seems to be a bit of a, somewhat of an opportunist. So I may not have as big enough a profile for him. So maybe I'm small potatoes in his mind. So who knows?
Well, the reason I bring him up is because so I did the debate with him on Digital Social Hour over on Sean Kelly's podcast in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it was my first ever debate, my first ever televised debate. And it's interesting because when you I don't know if there's such a thing as winning a debate, because I get it when people say so and so won a debate, because in a formal debate you have the audience who decide who the victor is. So it's really kind of a victor is decided by way of consensus. And I mean, you know how I feel about consensus. Consensus doesn't actually mean something is true. It just means that somebody did a better job of articulating an argument better than the other. But even still, consensus can be skewed because, people might have predetermined biases that inform their outcome. And so people show up to debates in the same way that, a fan of a sports team might show up to a game, wanting their side to win. And so if you already have a side, you are there merely to support your quote unquote side. So consensus can only go but so far. I say all that to say, at the same time, when you look at the comment section are overwhelmingly in my favor. So by those standards, I quote unquote won the debate. But what's interesting is he's been challenging me every chance he gets to a second debate, to a rematch. And in the same breath, he's saying that he won the debate. He's saying that he destroyed me, that he butchered me. And, Chad don't want the smoke again, says Austin. And my question for you, Chuck, is have Mike Tyson ever challenged a competitor to a rematch when he won that match to begin with? Has Floyd Mayweather ever challenged a competitor to a rematch when he won the match to begin with?
Floyd did one time. He fought.
Did? Okay.
Yeah, he fought Marcos Maidana a second time, only because a lot of people felt like Maidana gave Floyd a good run for his money, and I guess it was somewhat of a pride thing for Floyd. He had to come back and I think show everyone that he was the better fighter. I believe he fought Marcos Maidana twice. I can look that up real quick, because I think he did. Because I remember a lot of people were like, "Dang, Floyd," because Marcos Maidana is very kind of weird style, kind of a wild, aggressive fighter. Kind of makes it difficult for a technical boxer like Floyd. So I believe he fought Marcos Maidana twice, if memory serves me correctly. But your point is still still stands, though. It just doesn't. You don't really get that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, maybe I stand corrected here, But at the same time, even with the scenario that you bring up, that's kind of a unique situation
Yeah.
because you have feedback from the spectators saying, well, it wasn't that fair of a match or what have you. And I don't really see a lot of people saying that it was unfair of a match between Austin and I, other than the few sycophants who are saying, try to talk more than Austin. He hogged all the time. It's like, okay,
Nah.
it is what it is.
Yeah, they did fight twice. My memory was correct on that. Floyd beat him twice. Beat him both times. But yeah.
I mean, I am kind of kicking myself though, because like going back and watching it, there's points I think I could have made stronger. There's things I think I could have like elaborated on. There's things that I should have corrected him on that I let slide. But it is what it is.
No, man. I mean, when it comes to debates, like you said, it has a lot to do with, as you mentioned, a lot of folks have preconceived notions and beliefs, and like you said, yeah, sometimes they just want their person to win, and so a lot of it has to do with, especially depending on the venue. I think the podcast scenario was just the three of you, right? So there was no live audience, and so there's no spontaneous reaction, you know what I mean? The oohs and ahs and the cheering and all that stuff kind of swing how a person perceives what is actually taking place. So you do have that. But in debates, I always look at it like this. The person that I'm sitting across, they're merely just a foil. They're really just there for me to kind of talk through them, and reach directly to the to the audience, because you never know who's listening, right?
Yes.
And oftentimes, a person will never admit when they've been. I mean, and this isn't just the person you're
Especially a
debating.
person with hubris.
Yeah, absolutely. But this even goes for the person that's listening. You know what I mean? They know when they hear something that really strikes them to their core, and it may take time. It may take a couple of days. It may take some weeks. Sometimes it'll take years. But once those gears start churning, they'll always reflect back on whatever that moment was that really got them to start to open their eyes. Like, man, that time.
Yeah, and you're saying this from firsthand experience.
Personal experience, yeah.
You've had people come to you and say, "Man, Chuck, with this conversation we had years ago, like you were right. It finally hit me."
Yeah.
Like I've heard people say that about you, and the same is true of me. Like there's people who come to me to this day from conversations we've had when I was 18, 19 years old, who were saying you were right. And it's like, for me, it's so refreshing to hear that, not because I want to be right all the time. It's refreshing to hear that because a lot of times I kick myself in like, man, did this conversation go over well? What was I too harsh with this person or what have you?
Yeah.
Only for them to come back all these years later and like it kind of like brings about some closure, if you will. But then too, I've had similar conversations with people where I go to them and like, man, you were right about this.
Right.
But yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. That's it though. That's it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's not always about who necessarily won, But I mean, I still think I've seen, cause it's I'm gonna be honest with you, it's hard for me to like listen to that entire debate from beginning to end, because I mean, I quite frankly, I just find Austin insufferable, so I can't. It's hard for me to listen to him, So that's a tough one. That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
So we are closing out the MLK project. We're moving on to other projects, but I did want to go out with a bang and have a one-on-one conversation with my good friend Chuck. He and I linked up years ago after Uncle Tom 2. We connected. We did some content together here and there, and then my first stab is at an independent documentary. I forget what it's called now.
The Administrative State.
Yes, the Administrative State. That was kind of me dipping my foot in the water, seeing if this is something I want to do. Looking back on that documentary, I would definitely want to go back and polish it up, but I just don't have the time to do that now. But all this time later, 19 episodes of the MLK Project later, here we are. So it's nice. It's kind of like a homecoming to have this conversation with you over episode 11 of the MLK Project.
It is. It is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
man.
Were you expecting it to be 3.5 hours long?
No, I was. No, I was not. No, I was not. I thought maybe, because I know episode 10 was like an hour. Because I know you put a portion of Yuri Bezmenov's speech, one of his speeches or lectures, at the end as like a bonus. So that took up a large chunk of the episode. So I was like, wow. I was like, shoot, man, an hour. I was salivating, you know. But you know, when I saw the final episode, you had sent me a portion of what you had done so far before it officially went public, and it was like 40 minutes long, 45 minutes long. I was like, okay, cool, this is gonna be great. So I'm expecting maybe another 30 minutes to an hour. And you sent me the final edit, and it was over 3 hours, man. I mean, you won't get any complaints from me. I love it. I love it. But yep. And I still watch it, man. You know, I just left the gym earlier. And pardon me, I got my fan blowing here. I hope the sound of the air is not.
You sound fine.
Okay, cool. Because my body time, I'm still kind of sweating. I'm still kind of hot from working out, man. I was like 2 hours ago. But every time I go to the gym, I'm on the treadmill or Stairmaster or something, getting my cardio, and I pop it right, set my phone up, and I'm watching the MLK Project over and over and over again, just different segments of it. Just, you know, because 3 hours is pretty long, but I'm always watching it, man. It has a ton of replay value, and I can't get enough of it, man.
Yeah, we're gonna play a couple of clips from it and kind of like elaborate on some of the scenes here. Yeah. As a matter of fact, let's do that now. So you were mentioning earlier the conversations that you and Keisha have been having about the so-called Black church and all that. So I wanted to play a clip that kind of touches on that a little bit, and then just give you a chance to expound upon it. These clips are a little long, so audience, hopefully y'all can bear with us. I don't think they'll mind though. So here's clip one, the Black liberation theology.
Traditional religious concepts are under growing scrutiny by Black theologians.
We liberals do get terribly excited when someone puts a bomb in a church and blows up 2, 3, 4 little children. But not over what Stokely called at one time the death of 400 or 500 black babies for lack of decent medicine and care.
In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, "Not everyone who calls me Lord, Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven." Right before that verse, Jesus warns us to beware of false prophets who are really vicious wolves who disguise themselves as harmless sheep. He says that you will know them by their fruit, because a good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit.
I felt a comradeship with Dr. King. I met him, Coretta Scott King, Stanley Levinson, and quickly formed a relationship with them.
The rich man can never be what he ought to be until the poor man is what he ought to be.
Dr. King had an insight that transcended his religious convictions. King began as a minister, but it was his politics that really superseded his original calling. King never tried to win people over to a religious persuasion. Never. He made no big deal of what your religious conviction was or what it wasn't. All he wanted you to do is to come into this struggle. And
when it comes to the question of what was Martin Luther King's effect on the church, it's important to look at what he believed theologically, which never included calling persons to repentance and to believe in Christ for forgiveness and a new life outside of an explicitly political agenda. With his adherence to the Marxist-rooted social gospel, coupled with the Marxist-Leninist tactics he employed in the civil rights movement, it is quite easy to see that one of the most rotten pieces of fruit he yielded was black liberation theology.
Since I didn't need the approval of my professors anymore, I didn't have to be the kind of theologian they wanted me to be. I was free. And I felt that freedom while I was writing Black Theology and Black Power in June 1968, in the wake of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
James Cone and 100 black ministers began to promote black liberation theology.
We're trying to take up where Dr. Martin Luther King left off.
The only reason those men felt like they had the wherewithal and the ability to do that was because of King's death.
King's assassination deepened my rage. I felt as if I was under a black spell. I wanted to wash my theology in the blood of black people.
It would only be at that point that they would be able to openly express these ideas. Prior to that, they knew that culture would not accept those ideas in any way, shape, or form and would actually push them away. So King thought it best not to engage with that in a vocal way, though he did so in a way that everything around him, every individual that he was connected with, every speechwriter that he was connected with, every inside person in leadership knew, understood, worked out, and walked out Marxist ideals.
King talked about class issue to his staff. He didn't do it primarily in his speeches because of the kind of anti-communism spirit that was so deep in America at that time. He was talking about restructuring everything. And if you talk about restructuring, you're talking about class too.
I'm a preacher's kid. My parents met in the Black Power movement, but more specifically for them, the movement for Black theology. Jesus was a revolutionary. And the job of the Christian is to revolutionize society. The job of the Christian is to liberate society from the powers on earth that are oppressing humanity. Everybody understand that? So that's liberation theology in a nutshell. Savior theology is a different type of theology. The job of the Christian is to go out and save these individuals who are behaviorally deficient. In other words, we're to bring them into the church, these individuals who are doing all of these evil, sinful things, and heal them and save them. That goes right in line with racist ideas and racist theology, in which they say, you know what, black people, other racial groups, the reason why they're struggling on earth is because of what they're behaviorally doing wrong. And it is my job as the pastor to sort of save these wayward black people, or wayward poor people, or wayward queer people. That type of theology breeds bigotry. Anti-racists fundamentally reject savior theology.
Wow.
Alrighty. So that's a scene from the MLK Project. Of course, it goes even deeper beyond that in the scene that immediately follows it. But yeah, Chuck, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to expound upon that.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me apologize to the nation for John Conyers. I apologize, Detroit, for just putting that stain upon the nation for as long as we did. But I mean, it's Detroit. I mean, what can you expect? I mean, John Conyers. I mean, was he? First of all, the guy needs a shot of adrenaline. My God, I don't know how he was able to, galvanize the masses to support his role as a congressman. I mean, goodness gracious, man, Kanye, give us some energy, just a little bit, please. But yeah, what he said was so telling. I mean, and like we always say, you say it a lot, and that is, if you want to know what's really at the heart of this thing, I mean, you have to listen to the people who are actually in favor of these ideas, and the folks who support them. I mean, he flat out told us. He said that King's mission his political mission superseded his original calling to bring people to Christ. He said that's not what King was about. He literally says King didn't care about that. He didn't care about your religion. He didn't care if you were a Christian. He didn't care if you believed that Christ died for your sins. He just needed more people to support his vision, his social vision, and that is what was most important to him. And he never cared about that. Never called people to the faith. Never called people to repentance. And I remember going back some years, speaking of, you and I, and, just being as close as we've been over the past few years, I remember you first saying, and I was not that I didn't believe you, but I was a bit taken aback. I said, wow. I said, that's quite a claim you're making there, Chad. I didn't push back on you on it because I believed you. And you said that you had listened to or read every public sermon on record that King ever gave. You've listened to every single word of each and every last one of them, and never once did King call men to repentance. Never once. I said, wow, not once? Not once. You listen to everyone that you can? Wow, not one. And then to hear John Conyers say that, and it's like, well, there you go. Chad wasn't lying when he said what he said, because a close ally of King's, Congressman Conyers, said that King didn't care if you were a Christian. That wasn't what his mission was about, right? It was superseded. His politics were superseded by his original calling. Now that was just so telling, just so telling. And just, Cone, I mean, he wanted to wash his theology in the blood of Black people. I mean, does it get any more blasphemous than needing to wash your blood or wash your theology in the blood of Black people? All right, this goes back to the whole premise of liberation theology, which is, of course, it's nothing more than Marxist, theory of conflict theory, dressed up in Christian language, because it promotes this idea that the oppressed, or to go back to someone like Howard Thurman, refers to the oppressed as the disinherited, right? That they have a special and a unique a goal and mission at hand to kind of make the world in a way, or remake the world, or shape the world in a way that's going to bring about a utopian society, or in other words, a communist society. And in their minds, of course, this is in line with Christianity in the Christian doctrine, the way it should be interpreted, because it was high time by the let's say around about 1940s, 1950s, for the oppressed, if you will, to sort of reshape the way we thought about Christian theology for the past 2,000, almost 2,000 years or so. And so, of course, these ideas of liberation theology, began within the Catholic Church in Latin America, which brings me to a quote. This is from Gustavo Gutierrez in his work, A Theology of Liberation. I think the year of its original publication was 1968. Right around the time when Cone's book was released. And of course, when you hear the term liberation theology versus Black liberation theology, I guess you can describe it as a kind of uniquely or an exclusively Latin American thing. But I kind of pulled this quote directly from his work. He says that theology by this time became a two-way street. And so what he means is, he says, and this is how I interpreted it here, is that a critical analysis of Christianity brought to bear how we view conditions of oppression, but it also caused us to revisit the meaning of Christianity itself. And so when we start to question quote unquote white savior theology or orthodox theology, and what message does Christianity have, or what does Christianity have to say to the oppressed, right? It becomes a different theology, but also we then begin to reflect back on the role of the church and how the church is just as guilty as every other institution of bringing to bear this oppressive status quo. And so the church needed to self-reflect and self-correct because the church was a huge part of the problem. And of course, you know, the church being this kind of as Ibram X. Kendi referred to it as this kind of white savior theology, or Cone refers to it as putting down this kind of white theology kind of a thing. So that's where kind of like all that comes from. And I just like to say one last thing with Kendi. I was he says that I wrote here when I was listening to him. I've heard him say this a bunch of times. Like I said, I watched the episode a few times, and I'm always amazed. And they throw out this term liberation. I'm always like liberate these people from what exactly? I mean, I know what they mean, but you know, it's just funny how they just throw these things out, but they never really expound. But you know, I wrote down here. I said, you're talking about, you know, liberating and I said, but we're all, whether we be black, white, rich or poor, I mean, we're all sinful, right? You know, and so you know, this idea that, well, Christianity has something to say, or Christ, that the teachings of Christ, his lessons, his life, the idea that it has something to say, not just to black people in terms of, well, you know, you're not living properly, and so therefore you don't have the earthly things that you feel as though you deserve, and so that promotes racist or bigoted ideas according to Kendi. But it's like, no, Christ's life and the good news, it has something to say to us all. And I don't really understand this whole idea that when you're finger wagging at black folks for all the things that they do wrong, that is somehow reinforcing a lot of these racist ideas. It's just completely and utterly preposterous. And then I asked myself lastly, and I'll let you chime in, Chad. I mean, is Kendi, does he consider himself to be a Christian? Is he a self-described Christian? I mean, what does he even know about the faith? Because I doubt that Ibram X. Kendi would consider himself to be a Christian. So yeah, I mean, that is very, very rich coming from someone like him, right? As he attempts to explain, I guess, quote unquote, orthodox or traditional theology, and how it reinforces bigotry and ideas of white supremacy. It's just absurd, Chad.
Yeah, it's very absurd. And he really did explain. Here's one of the things that I actually appreciate about Ibram X. Kendi. It's kind of a weird thing, because like, for all the flack that he gets online from a lot of conservatives and others, specifically as it relates to comparing him to the civil rights legacy, is that to the extent that Ibram X. Kendi says a thing that is viewed by us as being completely absurd, and it is absurd, don't get me wrong, you then have conservatives who kind of run up and say, no, that's not what King wanted. King was arguing for something different. But the fact is, what Kendi is arguing for is in keeping and cut from the same cloth as what King was advocating for. It's indistinguishable, right, quite frankly. And we'll get to that here later on. Right. But Kendi is actually telling you what his origins are. He's telling you that I grew up in the Black liberation theology tradition. I grew up, you know, I came of age in the 70s where it was all about Black theology. And here's what I understand Black theology to mean. And it's not the same thing as biblical theology, or what he calls white theology. So he's telling you, like, he's giving you insight into where he's coming from, into how he was brought up, and what he still holds to. But it's like conservatives don't want to believe their lying eyes. They don't want to believe him when he tells you this is what Black liberation theology is. It comes out of the civil rights tradition. It comes out of the civil rights legacy. It's one and the same. They play these kind of mental gymnastics games, conservatives, to try to make it not the same thing.
Yeah.
You care to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. You're right. And then, like you said, it's amazing when, people have convinced themselves, like you said, not to, not to believe their lying eyes. He is literally saying, he's saying the thing out loud. I think, I can't remember where, it may be a couple of minutes after where that particular segment that you just played ends, where you actually use a snippet from that famous episode of Good Times, when Michael, fashions a portrait of Jesus after, Ned the wino, was it? And this whole thing about the image of the Black Jesus, it's amazing, because when you all of a sudden start talking about Jesus and his color, and perhaps I apologize if I'm kind of getting off topic a little bit, because we didn't necessarily talk about Jesus and his color. But although this is a part of the Black liberation tradition, in fact, but when you kind of go about this, when you promote this idea that not only was Jesus a revolutionary, but Jesus was also Black, like you said, it turns Jesus into a different kind of Jesus that was not known to history. It certainly isn't a Jesus that is described in the New Testament, in the Gospels. It's just not, it's just not there. And so you have to, first and foremost, you do have to begin kind of depicting Jesus as a quote unquote, a Black person, so that you can, firstly identify with that individual, and then secondarily go about the business of, promoting these, these left-wing ideas in the name of this kind of new political theology that is separate and apart from what they refer to as transcendental theology. Theology takes on a political dimension at this time, by the late 60s.
Great insights. Let's go ahead and move on to clip 2. This is another scene from the MLK Project. This one discusses, I guess, King's Leninism, quite frankly. I know I've spoken on that quite a bit. And I think this scene kind of gives better insight into that whole thing. Of course, all this is expounded upon in the actual episode, but I'm going to play the clip and allow Chuck to expound.
Was MLK Jr. a socialist, a Marxist, or just a critic of the ills of capitalism?
At the very least, he was the last one, which is a critic of the ills of capitalism. The idea that someone who's critical of capitalism in the 1960s, right, who's concerned about income inequality and who advocates for a universal basic income, the idea that those things in and of themselves make you a communist or Marxist is one that I think is hard for anyone to sustain. But I think what ends up happening is Shadow say, no, these few things that I find that King did, right, his critiques of capitalism and so on and so forth, though that's the evidence I use to charge and convict him of Marxism, and I just reject that. The stated views on core Christian doctrine that I've seen from Dr. King, from the writing of his own hands, put him, in my perspective, outside of biblical orthodoxy. What I find interesting is that when King writes about his theological views, Chad believes him. But when he writes about his economic views, specifically against communism, then he says, of course, that's what a lying communist would do.
So here's the thing, Delano. You can't take it seems like this is what you're doing. You're taking completely out of the equation the way the communists actually work. And I challenge you, genuinely. I'm not saying this to win an argument. I'm not saying this to do a gotcha. I'm genuinely challenging you and everybody watching this right now to actually go and look at communist subversion and how it was actually being carried out over the course of the 20th century. In order to make sense of a lot of things that I'm saying, you actually have to understand how this kind of monster operates. They don't do it, like they move through clandestine and covert means.
Oftentimes, people naively deny that King had anything to do with communism or Marxism, simply on the basis that he wasn't a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. They completely disregard the fact that communists routinely use notable figures like pastors and professors who were sympathetic to the communist cause, but weren't official members of the Communist Party, since such membership would not allow the notable figure to be as effective in their real goal.
The communists would never let him join the party because he was too useful from the outside.
The folly of the public consensus surrounding King is predicated on the notion that he was a genuine pastor who led a noble movement and had nothing at all to do with communism and Marxism. This all is an intentional and deliberate deception, which is difficult to understand if one doesn't first understand Lenin, as King's entire movement drew directly from the Leninist playbook. In his book, What Is to Be Done, Lenin said that a social democrat, which is how King described himself, must concern himself first with an organization of revolutionists. King's organization, the SCLC, was made up entirely of what Lenin called revolutionists. Lenin said that the organization must consist of persons engaged in revolution as a profession, which is true of King's organization, which was made up of professional activists who had no real jobs outside of the organization. Lenin said that the organization must operate in secrecy in the struggle against the government, which King did in his secret relationship with known communist Stanley Levison, and hired another communist attorney, Clarence B. Jones, to transport messages between King and Levison in order to skirt FBI surveillance once his relationship with Stanley was found out. Lenin said that the revolutionists must speak in a coded language to rally the masses, thus making it difficult for the gendarmes to pick up clues of their true Marxist intentions.
Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.
Lenin said that the revolutionists must be trained for years, as King was under the social gospel and Hegelian dialectics at Crozer Theological Seminary in Boston University, coupled with the Marxist nonviolent direct action training he received at Highlander Folk School and from Bayard Rustin directly.
We were soon going to have a civil rights bill and a voter rights act. And for that, you could use demonstrations and nonviolence.
Lenin said that the organization's strategy must include demonstrations, and that the organization's revolutionists must be professionally trained in the art of combating the police.
We are masters in our nonviolent movement in disarming police forces. They don't know what to do.
Lenin said that our task is to exploit or utilize every manifestation of discontent and protest, which King constantly did, never being satisfied after the passage of the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act, but always moving on to the next cause.
We are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved.
Lenin said that the revolutionists must establish an organization that is capable of combining all forces, which will then awaken more militant forces, which King was able to do with the Civil Rights Movement, which gave way to the Black Power movement.
These young people are saying that there must be a revolution of values in our country. I think the young people in the Negro community who are raising these questions are raising some very profound questions about our total society. In other words, they are saying that there must be a restructuring of the architecture of our society.
And lest anyone is tempted to chalk all this up to sheer coincidence, an informant who is close to the King apparatus reported that King's most trusted advisor, Stanley Levison, praised King, calling him a true Marxist-Leninist. Lenin was advocating for the overthrow of the state, which was essentially Martin Luther King's long-term goal.
Lenin, the seer, the incorruptible prophet, the father of Bolshevism, who heads the new order. He will lie buried in Red Square, a god.
It really plays into the communist fantasy that since there is no God, according to the Marxist doctrine, God is a projection of man's own ideals. It's everything that he wishes that he could be. That's what they believe. They actually think that mankind is capable of having civility without a state, without a government that can guarantee certain protections. We think we don't need it. And so anything from police, FBI. It's all wrong. It's all bad because the state in and of itself is illegitimate.
I had many hours of talk with responsible members of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. As I sat there, this Chinese said that, you know, comrade, all state administrations are oppressive to someone. I said, well, comrade, what about the communists? What about your progressive socialist state? Is that also oppressive? And then he said, yes. He said that the only difference in us and the capitalist state is that we work for the dissolution of the state. We work for our own disappearance. And I thought that was very honest. I met so much honesty there. And I thought that was a very free statement. And that's
according to Marxist theory, the state is simply a means to an end, because once we seize control, well, then there's going to be this spontaneous outbreak of social justice. And then that is supposed to bring in the phase of communism. And so Hoover is the villain because Hoover was the head of the FBI. It's not the Panthers, it's not the Weathermen, it's not the Symbionese Liberation Army, it's not Schnick, it's not the Civil Rights Movement. It's not them, it's the state. They're simply trying to help man rid itself of this oppressive entity.
The FBI undertook a program in 1968 to harass and destroy New Left political organizations whose views the federal police agency disagreed with, including those against black extremists, the Socialist Workers' Party, communists, and a program to disrupt white hate groups. Director Hoover detailed the setup of the program, saying anarchists and revolutionists had to be neutralized if law and order and a civilized society were to survive. Ramsey Clark, who was Attorney General when it started, called the program deplorable and said in his judgment those who took part are indictable.
By the mid-1970s, J. Edgar Hoover, along with his task of identifying and stamping out Leninist subversion for the sake of national security, would be harshly vilified, even by elected officials. And King, by comparison, who was really the deceptive and dishonest agitator, and was well connected to the Leninist subverters, would be made out to be the victim.
Okay. So again, I know that was a long scene, but I just wanted to give as much context as possible.
Love it.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Well, first, let me just, I guess I'll start with Delano's comment. By the way, I know I'm not the only one that noticed it. I love Chad's expression. The whole time Delano was speaking, Chad is just looking at him. It's almost as though Chad is trying to be respectful, and he's the gentleman that he is. And he's just looking at Delano, just giving him that look. And it looks like Chad, he's trying not to, because you can see once it's Chad's turn to speak, Chad kind of chuckles through his response, or starts off with a chuckle. So you can kind of tell Chad was trying not to laugh as Delano was putting forth a pitiful and pathetic defense of King, stating that yes, it's definitely the latter. King's criticisms of capitalism. Let me just say that is the first indicator right there that something is amiss. Okay, because only someone who is a full-blown believer in Karl Marx's form or version of dialectics, or someone who is, I don't know, perhaps ignorant, and I don't think King was ignorant, by his own admission, right? When throughout his years of study, he studied Hegel, he studied Marx, by his own admission. What's the book we referenced in the docuseries that King wrote, where he talks about, he says it outright when he talks about the synthesis between communism and quote unquote capitalism and this and that. I forgot, Chad, refresh my memory on the book King. And it's funny because I'm actually the one quoting from it. Anyway, it'll come to me in a second. But my point is that King knew, he was familiar enough with Marx to the point where
Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? Thank you. The idea that capitalism is to be criticized, first and foremost, like I said, that right there gives you an insight. He tips his card when he does that. Because if you know anything about economics, you'll know that capitalism is not, of course, an economic system to be criticized, because capitalism has nothing to do with economics. It is an ism, in other words, an ideology that justifies the existence of capital, which is a form of property that Karl Marx refers to as quote unquote bourgeois property. Because Karl Marx believed with his form of dialectics that humankind, that we were moving toward communism in a set of dialectical phases. Okay, I think the first phase, I think, was slavery. The second phase was feudalism, and capitalism was the second phase in the quote unquote dialectic. And so it is an ideology that justifies the current economic order, but it is not a free market, or it is not an economic system in and of itself. Because the free market system, you can have freedom more or less within the market system, but the market system is the only way to do economics. So in other words, the free market system is as old as man. It has been around since forever. There have always been markets, right? I mean, and you can, again, there's a difference, you know, in terms of time and place with regard to how much freedom actually exists within that market. But the free market system has always existed. Okay, capitalism is simply a theory of historicism that was popularized by Marx and Engels. So there's your first kind of tip right there, that okay, you're dealing with someone who is in fact a Marxist, because only a Marxist would criticize this straw man called capitalism that they have created so as to sow discontent for the purpose of pushing us toward the natural phase in the dialectical process, which would be into socialism. And so I it's just funny, and you know, and Delano says, well, you know, and he admits, he says, well, yes, I am aware that MLK, that he, you know, promoted this idea of a universal basic income, and he talked about wealth and income redistribution, and but that in and of itself doesn't.
Not to cut you off, but he also admitted King's biblical heresy.
Right.
Yeah.
He did, and admitted his heresy. That makes me wonder, well, what kind of, what kind of I don't know what kind of theologian, what kind of theology is he promoting? In fact, and why is King to be taken at his word when he promotes all of these things that are Marxist to their core, but he chides you for not believing King when he says the thing, right? When he puts forth a denial, as if that is the standard for investigative research. Your common basic, you know, blue collar homicide detective doesn't function in that way, right? You have a suspect and you believe that he is guilty of having committed a crime. You don't simply ask him if he committed the crime, and when he puts forth a tacit denial, you say, okay, well, that's the end of that. He said no. That's not how that works. It's not how it works at all. And so I would ask Delano, okay, when you're talking about a universal basic income, well, where in the world does such a notion even come from? Not only that, but I would say that Delano is being a gross hypocrite when he does this, because I don't think that Delano would tolerate such rhetoric coming from the mouth of any fill in the blank modern day you know, leftists, whether they be in politics or in entertainment or academia, such and so forth. I don't think he would tolerate that. But once upon a time, or I think that he would rightfully criticize that person. Once upon a time, and the excuse I remember him giving, well, I don't know if he gave this defense one during the debate on Jason Whitlock's podcast, but I recall him in a conversation with you on your YouTube channel in the debate. He said that sure, the King, yes, has some communist beliefs or perhaps some communist leanings, but I can excuse King's communism in 1960 versus someone today who, in other words, and I don't know if Delano used these words exactly, but his sentiment was that, well, the people of today would know better, should know better. But King in the 1960s perhaps wouldn't have known any better. And I'm saying to myself that communism was a much, the revulsion and the natural aversion to communism that most Americans had in the 1960s. I mean, my God, it's completely opposite. Alana was saying you can almost expect, given how much of our society in every single solitary social sector responsible for socializing and enculturating Americans into the various things that we ought to know and the things that we ought to understand in order to keep the society functioning properly.
Yeah. And if you'll allow me to interject here real quick, Chuck,
anytime,
because you're flowing. But I took what he said in that YouTube video discussion with me to mean not so much a giving King a pass, but giving Negroes a pass in general in those times.
Right.
Now, how can you blame a domestic is a word that he used? How can you blame a colored laborer for being wooed by communism in the 1960s when conditions were what they were? I can excuse them more so than someone today. So he wasn't only giving King a pass, he was giving colored people a pass. That was a very patronizing statement by Squires, because it assumes that coloreds in those days were ignorant on what communism was, when in fact you had a lot of colored men in particular, pastors in particular, who were very critical of communism, vocally so. Of course, those names are buried today. The only time you'll ever see them pop up is in a footnote of a book, if even that. But there were a lot of colored ministers. In fact, when you read Hammer and Hoe by Robin G. Kelley, along with other books by modern Marxists who are historians of Marxism, gleefully so, they even argue that one of the biggest obstacles for spreading communism among colored people was the Negro minister. And so you can't convince me in this kind of nonchalant way that, oh yeah, colored people, they were just none the wiser. I can excuse them because they were up against the conditions. Well, even the conditions are embellished upon, which I think we make clear in season 1. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, blacks, they knew what was going on. Just as much as anyone else, especially when it came to the threat of communism. And that's what's so strange about Delano Squires' position. It's like, okay, well, if you want to say that to me, you can't really blame blacks for buying into it, even though I don't buy that. But that's, I guess, a separate issue somewhat. But if you are at least willing to admit what was really going on with the civil rights movement, then maybe perhaps that's a good start, somewhere for we can sort of establish a kind of common ground. But for some reason he's sort of he's hell-bent on, for whatever reason, on trying to defend the legacy of King, when you would expect someone in Delano Squires' position to know better. Again, I'm not trying to get into his head. I don't really care, but because I have no way of really knowing, so therefore it's not up for me to speculate as to where he's coming from or what his motivations may be. Maybe he's speaking from a place of genuine conviction. That's just what he believes. And like I said, I just find that to be extremely troubling. And like you said, and I like how you went into the tactics of Lenin and referring back to what Lenin wrote. And I've said this myself about Delano. I said, and others like him who are of the same position. It seems to me that they may know a lot about MLK. I mean, I'm trying to be as kind as possible. I don't know how you can know a lot about him and deny what we claim in the docuseries, but nevertheless, I get the sense that they don't know much about not just Marxist doctrine, but they don't know the doctrine of Leninism. Like you mentioned, this is why you hear people combine those two terms, or Marxist-Leninism, because Lenin did the most up to that point, and probably since then, in creating a kind of political framework from which to enact these ideas that Marx and Engels put down in the 19th century, right? Lenin said, okay, well, here's how we're going to do it, okay? Because instead of things kind of happening naturally, as Marx prophesied, you know, Lenin was of the position that in order for socialism and eventually communism to come to bear, there must be a vanguard. Okay, now we have to take society in that way, because, you know, for reasons they aren't going there naturally, or at least as quickly as you know, they would have liked the world to. And so we need a vanguard, and so we need to come up with methods, tactics, strategies to make this happen. And I don't think someone in Delano's position actually understands what that all means. I just like to go here too, just talking about democratic socialism. Again, I mean, you know, King literally said these things. He said that there must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move towards a democratic socialism. I'm reading from a book here. This statement is remarkable since King rarely allowed his positive response to democratic socialism to be recorded. This is the one instance when it was recorded. His usual practice, according to his aides, was to demand that they, quote, turn off the tape recorder, unquote, while he expounded on the virtues of what he called democratic socialism, and said, quote, I can't say this publicly, and if you say I said it, I'm not gonna admit it. King didn't believe that capitalism as it was constructed. Again, how do you even construct capitalism? You can't construct the free market economy. It's not constructed. That's the whole point. Anyway, King didn't believe that capitalism as it was constructed could meet the needs of poor people, the aide said, quote, and that we might need to look at what was a kind of socialism, but a democratic form of socialism, unquote. So, I mean, I don't know where you go from there. I like this, my last thing, Chad, and I kind of let you chime in here. CLR James, for those of you who don't know, CLR James was I believe he was born in Trinidad, if memory serves me correctly, but he was a Marxist a theoretician. He believed in it. He was in favor of it. He wrote several books. He had a personal meeting with King, I think in '64, but I could be wrong on the year. But, you know, he met with King. He and King, you know, exchanged letters. CLR James provided King with a copy of his then newly released book, Black Jacobins. All right, talking about the Jacobins in the French Revolution and whatnot. But I just wanted to mention him briefly because you know, his Marxist bona fides are, you know, not to be questioned. Just look up CLR James if you are unfamiliar with who he is. But the great Marxist historian CLR James recalls that King told him that while he believed in radical ideas, he couldn't say such things from the pulpit. James says that King, quote, this is according to James, wanted me to know that he understood and accepted, in fact, and agreed with the ideas that I was putting forth, ideas which were fundamentally Marxist-Leninist. Now, here's a Marxist-Leninist, a pro-Marxist by the name of CLR James, who King met with while abroad in Ghana. And according to CLR James, King confided in him that he believed, in fact, fundamentally in Marxist-Leninism, but he could not say such things publicly. And anyway, I'll let you chime in, Chad. I can keep going. I got, you know, resources and post for days, but I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, so I actually mentioned CLR James in a interview that I just participated in last week with PragerU on their show, The Brief. I'm not even sure if they're going to air it because I don't know that PragerU agrees with my views on King, but that's neither here nor there. But by the way, so whenever I do interviews, I particularly like interviews conducted by people who push back against what I'm saying, because I think that makes for good discord, especially when, or this dialogue, especially when the two sides are coming in good faith. And I do believe that the interviewer came in good faith. I forget his name. His name escapes me. But he kept appealing to, well, what about, like, you could tell that he was asking questions vicariously through the proverbial, well, what do you think about people with, those who would say X, Y, and Z? And so he kept coming at me with this line of questioning. Well, what about people who would say this? What about people who would say that? And I brought up the fact that, King, after having left the Highlander Folk School and after having, did the Montgomery bus boycott and became kind of like a national hero of sorts, he, along with Adam Clayton Powell Jr. and a young Richard Nixon and others, were sent to Ghana. And then after having left Ghana, went to England. It is there that he met with CLR James. And after having come back to the United States, CLR James disseminated letters to various communist front groups in the United States, basically insisting on the use of nonviolent direct action and supporting and galvanizing around King, because they saw him as the kind of revolutionary, if you will, who can appeal to the moderate masses and kind of shoehorning Marxism into the West. And that was the whole thing behind it. Of course, Chuck can speak more to CLR James than I can, but it's interesting because there's a lot of people on this quote unquote conservative side of the political spectrum who are trying to hold on for dear life to the legacy, the quote unquote legacy of King. And, well, what about this? And what about the speech? And one of the things that he asked me was, well, I concede everything that you're saying, but you have to agree that the Voting Rights Act was good legislation, that was a good thing, that was a positive thing, irrespective of King's Marxism or what have you. And I took that question in the same vein as I took a kind of trip up question that Delano put to me whenever I debated him. The question that Delano asked me, and you all can go back and watch it on Jason Whitlock's show, was about slavery. And these questions are interesting because, there's this consensus, this kind of moral consensus that we all have when it comes to questions of slavery, when it comes to questions of universal suffrage and all the rest. We look at these as automatic good things. And so if you're the oddball who's saying, well, actually, I don't agree with universal suffrage, I don't agree that slavery is inherently bad, because I'm a Christian. I believe that we are all slaves. The question is, what are you a slave to? The beautiful paradox of being a Christian is that you become a slave to Christ. Paul referred to himself as a bondservant to Christ. Bondservant means slave. He refers to himself as a servant to Christ. So we as Christians, we become slaves to Christ. But the beautiful paradox of it is that those whom the Lord sets free are free indeed. And so we're slaves to Christ, but yet we're free. It's this beautiful paradox that if you're not looking for Christ, it might miss you, quite frankly. But we're all slaves. But the question is, what are you a slave to? Bob Dylan did a song, I think in the 70s, when he was on his little religious trip, where he said, you're going to have to serve somebody. He says, it might be the devil or it might be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. There's no in between. There's no gray area. There's no, neutrality. Neutrality is a myth, quite frankly. But you're going to have to serve somebody. You're a slave. You're a sheep. It's interesting because conservatives like to throw around the word sheep. Oh, you're a sheep. You're just a sheep because you're complying to the government. We're all sheep. The question is, what are you a sheep to? To what or to whom are you following? And for a lot of us, it's our own stomach. It's our own hubris. And so being a slave to Christ, yet being free indeed, is a beautiful paradox that I think we should all ponder on. I'm getting sidetracked here. My point is that Delano asked a question about slavery, and my answer to that question, as sloppy as it may have been, was coming from that framework of slavery existed for the overwhelming majority of human history and still exists to this very day. But to take the kind of Marxian interpretation of American slavery as being this kind of doom and gloom thing and this oppressive thing, and we needed liberation from it by any means necessary. I don't buy into that narrative. I don't agree with that narrative, and that strikes a lot of people as odd because of the way that we've been educated. So it's a trip up question, and the question in itself automatically puts me in a bad vein. And a similar thing is the case when it comes to, well, wouldn't you agree that the Voting Rights Act was good legislation? No. I don't start from the premise that universal suffrage is an automatic good thing. I just don't. I believe that we should have parameters up for those who are seeking to register to vote. I believe that there needs to be certain qualifications, including the passage of a literacy test to make sure that the person seeking to vote understands how our constitutional republic works. I don't believe that we should just let anybody and everybody who breathes air and happens to be to exist within the confines of what we call the United States of America should have the so-called right to vote. I don't believe that. So, of course, my answering that question in that way is going to put me in a bad vein by a lot of people's standards. And then too, I argued that universal suffrage, the Voting Rights Act under King, all it really did was nationalize the electoral process. This is in keeping with Marx's goal of the rise of the proletariat. Universal suffrage is a ladder and the incremental rung of the ultimate goal of the rise of the proletariat. That sounds very weird to a lot of people, I understand, but hopefully somebody will come along who can explain it better than the way that I'm trying to explain it if it still doesn't make sense to you. I remember making this argument whenever I had to sit down with Chuck Littleton, Vince Everett Ellison, and April Chapman, and even Vince Everett Ellison was baffled at the fact that I don't believe in universal suffrage. But do watch that debate if and when it comes out on PragerU. But not debate. I'm sorry, interview. It wasn't a debate. And I do believe that the interviewer came in good faith, but I do know that there was internal debate at PragerU as to whether to interview me at all, because they view my my views on King as controversial.
Yeah, hey man, say just speak the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Even if it's you have to build your own independent thing. I have nothing against PragerU. I think generally speaking they do a lot of great things, a lot of good stuff. They put out a lot of good information. But hey man, maybe time for Chad O. Jackson to have his own, to have his own thing. I'm not trying to say that PragerU or whatever outlet, the Daily Wire, and this group and that group are quote unquote conservative gatekeepers, if you want to call them that. But man, I support you 100%, and speak how you feel and what you genuinely believe, and stay true. That's what I say. But I just like to real quick before you probably move on to the next clip. Yeah, you were right. It was he met with James in London, Buckingham Palace. I think he wasn't the only person. There were a group of Black intellectuals, CLR James being among them. This was in 1957, and it wasn't the book Black Jacobins. CLR James had written that book a lot earlier. That was the book that really gave CLR James this worldwide acclaim, because it was a book about it was a Marxian or Marxist analysis of the Haitian Revolution. At the time when he met up with King, he was actually writing a book on Kwame Nkrumah, the Ghanaian Marxist who founded the Organization of African Unity, which Malcolm X would model his version.
Real quick, But the Black Jacobins was the book that he sent home.
Yeah,
Came home with,
that is the
right?
book. Yeah, he sent. Yep, that is the book that he sent with King. I thought that it was a more recent work, but at that time he was actually writing a book on the Ghanaian revolution, or it was called Nkrumah and the Ghanaian Revolution, I believe, was the book that he wrote. But C.L.R. James had a, I mean, just to give you a brief idea on who he was. He wrote just a list of some of his books. He wrote a book called A History of Pan-African Revolt. And again, it's interesting because, Black liberation theology has its roots in Pan-Africanism. In fact, this was before the word Black became the more common refrain for colored folks in America. They were borrowing a lot of political ideas of this kind of unified colored diaspora, considering the fact that we were all victims of white colonization or white dominance or white oppression of some sort. This gave us a shared experience that we could then use to cement our ranks, so to speak, because our whole orientation was created, was forged within this context of imperialism and colonialism and domination. And so that was kind of like the original idea of Pan-Africanism. And then when you fast forward a few decades after Du Bois and Garvey, and then, the rise and popularity of Malcolm X by the 1950s and 60s, the Christian liberation theologians were borrowing a lot of these Pan-African ideas. And a lot of these Pan-African ideas, are underpinned or undergirded by a lot of Islamic kind of a sentiment with regard to this notion that Blacks ought to reject Christianity, considering the fact that Christianity as an institution and as a doctrine was used as a weapon to oppress Black peoples. So instead of kind of pushing Blacks into the ranks of organizations, say, for example, like the Nation of Islam, the Christian church, right, and some of its leading theologians like Cone, as he openly admits to being inspired by Malcolm X, instead of pushing Blacks into the Nation of Islam, they began to embrace the theo-political ideas of the Nation of Islam. They kind of brought these ideas into the fold of the Christian church and this newly emerging quote unquote Black church. But some of C.L.R. James' works includes A History of Pan-African Revolt, like I said, Nkrumah and the Ghanaian Revolution, World Revolution. He wrote a book on Toussaint L'Ouverture, the story of the only successful slave revolt in history. He has a book called Notes on Dialectics, where he talks about Hegel, Marx, and Lenin, state capitalism and the World Revolution, and so on and so forth. And so C.L.R. James is a big deal within their circles. And it is not inconsequential that MLK knew him personally, and that they met and they wrote corresponding letters back and forth between one another.
Before we move on, if you don't mind also speaking to, I guess, the second half of the clip, as we get more into the globalist king and how we kind of expound upon Lenin's quest toward the dissolution of the state, which coincided with King's more Fabian belief. And I guess Lenin had Fabian vibes about him as well, to be sure. But you speak on the dissolution of the state and how that's the ultimate goal, and how the FBI and all of these other agencies were I guess the tides turned in the 1970s, where J. Edgar Hoover went from being a national hero for really pushing the importance of national security to all of a sudden being a villain, and King would then occupy the role as being a hero. And so speak a little bit on that, and then to the I guess what Huey P. Newton was trying to explain.
Yeah, I think that, and I don't mean to sound conspiratorial. I do believe that there were elements within our intelligence apparatus, and Chad covers this, we cover this in the docuseries, that were really trying to push people like Hoover and Skousen and a lot of your anti-communist hawks, if you will, to try to really push them to the margins, right, and kind of make them seem like they were the villains or whatever. And like you say, it's so unfortunate because J. Edgar Hoover, he was very deliberate in his approach, and he wasn't a reckless man. There was no kind of, you spoke to this person, or you did this, or you did that, or you have these beliefs and this and that, and so therefore, we're going to ruin you and liquidate you or throw you in prison or whatnot. It didn't happen that way. Obviously, it didn't happen that way, because if it did, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are today, if that's what the FBI was actually up to. But you said, like, why did the perception in J. Edgar Hoover's reputation, why did it turn around about the 1970s? I think what Hoover died in 71 or 72 when he died.
He died in 72.
72. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I really do believe that that academia at all levels really went about the business of kind of creating and shaping the narrative of the time to try to make it seem like that the people who were involved in the quote unquote movement were really kind of pursuing real freedom or equality and this thing or another. And it's interesting how these kind of communist forces wed themselves to things that are more kind of mainstream and sort of more widely accepted, and they kind of assume the role of being the force behind all of these positive changes by trying to get or align themselves with things that they know the public would readily accept. But yeah, I think it has a lot to do with, I think it's a multitude of factors. I think it has a lot to do with the propaganda surrounding the Vietnam War and the way the United States was painted and the way we were depicted domestically. I think it has a lot to do with like we talk about a lot of the assassinations that occurred, King's assassination, Bobby Kennedy's assassination. We have the break-in of the FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania. And what was that, 73, I think was the year that occurred. And the subsequent committees, the church committee and so on. During the 1970s, you had I consider, I call it like this kind of this post Watergate era. And Americans became very kind of, I guess, somewhat skeptical or skittish, or they became a little bit squeamish when you talked about police surveillance and a lot of these types of things. And so I think that's a very, very kind of, it's a very loaded question. But I think the lead up to the 1970s, I think, Chad, we cover this a bit in maybe an episode or two going back to the first season, but that's a very, very tall task in and of itself to really try to unpack how a lot of these ideas of sort of letting communists and their fellow travelers kind of have their way, just allowing them to kind of go about their business. And why were they allowed to do that? And what was the grand scheme of things? And why was there the popular opinion amongst many leading intellectuals and many politicians within both parties to kind of establish some kind of dual or multi polarity within the global scheme of things, so as not to allow the United States to become the one lone global hegemon. The Soviet Union had to create a kind of counterbalance to our power for the sake of global peace and stability. And I think there's a lot at work. I know I said a lot, and maybe I didn't answer the question directly, because I think it's a very, very open-ended question. But I think there were elements at work within our society that were hell-bent on trying to really undermine the efforts of the FBI, but more importantly, the legacy of J. Edgar Hoover, to really turn him into the bad guy. Because I think that, I mean, again, I hate to sound conspiratorial. I don't like to say things like they and this and that. But I think that, you know, folk within our country were really trying to steer us in this direction to embrace a more collectivist kind of mindset within our society. And I think King represented that.
Yeah, I mean, James Angleton over at the CIA was pushed out. He was staunchly anti-communist and was even probing communist infiltration into the CIA. And then too, when you look at the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, there were admittedly left-leaning field agents, lowest rung of the totem pole, who, after Hoover died, conveniently would come out and say, yeah, it was a very racist and very conservative outfit under Hoover. And even though these agents in question never came out and directly said, yes, Hoover had something to do with the assassination of King, they said it in a kind of way of, I wouldn't be surprised if Hoover had something to do with the assassination of King. Again, they're making these accusations after Hoover was deceased. But yeah, and I'm like you. You don't want to veer too far off into quote unquote conspiracy theory land, because it is at that point that you just become unserious, especially if you don't have the facts to back up or to validate what it is you're saying. And this is why we really had to not condense, but basically break this out into 19 episodes and slow it down and really walk the audience through how this history unfolded and what are the connecting pieces, what is the connecting tissue. Just present the evidence to you, and you can go from there. Like, you can go and expound upon that research, and you'll see that no, there definitely was an agenda at play, because it really is. I mean, that's what politics is. It's a power struggle. And when you look at the rogue CIA, or not rogue, the rogue intelligence agencies that came out of the late 80s, who were working hand in hand with foreign intelligence agencies at the same time that we're pushing for something called a New World Order, which sought to empower the United Nations at the expense of nation states. This is a very real history that took place. The unfortunate thing is you got people like Candace Owens and others who take some of this information and deliver it in a very non-serious way, and they tie elements and forces to it that don't directly tie to it, if that makes sense. It becomes one of those things where someone like Chuck and myself are sitting here and we're probably not even believed, because we're put into the same bucket as your baseless, reckless commentators. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, yeah, and to go back to Huey, which you asked me about, the comment he made about, you know, he goes over and he speaks to some Chinese delegation, and he says, you know, how do you explain this? I mean, this is amazing. Huey says that he asked the Chinese officials about their repression of their people, and the idea of the dissolution of the state. You know, I mean, you look at, you know, my native country and you see what we have going on, and I see what you have going on. How can you claim to be, you know, for the people? You know, and mind you, I mean, the Black Panther, I mean, they idolized, you know, Mao. They looked up to him. You know, they carried around Mao's little red book, you know, chanting, waving the books around, selling the books. As part of their fundraising efforts in the early days was selling the quotations of Mao. And he goes and he speaks with them, and he said, well, we're working toward the destruction of the state. So the state is working towards its own destruction. Okay. I just got one simple question. I don't know wherever Huey P. Newton is today. I can guess, where he is today, because he surely did not reform himself. He surely did not find Christ. Died quite unceremoniously in 1989. Still running around thinking, he's big bad, Huey P. Newton, and the local drug dealers there in Oakland just got sick and tired of him, so they offed him. But that's a whole nother discussion. But I would ask him and ask anyone else, does the Chinese government look like it's on the verge of, I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. But after, Tiananmen Square and all the other things that have taken place since that time, it doesn't look like the CCP is working toward its absolution. If that's the right word. I don't think that's happening. Once these people seize control, Chad, of the mechanisms of the state, I don't know. It's a weird thing. They don't seem to give it up, do they?
Yeah.
Right. And until one of their rivals, right, comes and seizes the control and then accuses them of being enemies of the state. As they did many of the old Soviet Stalin after his death, like Lavrentiy Beria and others, accused them of being enemies of the state after having been good communists for so long, only to then be executed when the leadership changes.
Yeah,
but the state doesn't go anywhere.
Did you think that episode 11 sufficiently dismantled, I guess, party loyalism?
For some people, it may have. You'll still get that individual who wants to,
or at least articulating that, like, well, I don't know. Finish your point.
No, I mean, yeah, I don't know if it dismantled it, but I think it may have caused some people to question. And again, this is not Chad and I trying to say, hey, we got those quote unquote black pillars out there, speaking of, the likes of, I'm speaking for myself now. I don't know how Chad feels about some of these individuals, so I'll just put that preface out there. You have folks like, maybe someone like Tucker Carlson or, Megyn Kelly, and what are some of these other individuals? I'm forgetting some of the more prominent ones on the podcast thing. Yeah. Who'd you just mention?
Candace Owens.
Somebody? Yeah. Candace Owens, and it's funny too. For those of you who have seen episode 11, and we talk about the long-term goals of the Soviet Union and how the idea to destroy or collapse to bring down the Berlin Wall and to officially announce the end of the Soviet Union, how this was all a long-term goal of the Soviet Union anyway. And you look at someone like Vladimir Putin, old man of the KGB, a one-time protege of Yuri Andropov, and now you have your modern day influencers. Not to go into current events, but of course they're being paraded around Russia the same way in which a lot of back in the day, whether it was Margaret Davis. Yeah, Angela Davis, even going back even further to the 20s and 30s when you had the likes of people like Langston Hughes, and you had intellectuals and celebrities and like Paul Robeson, and you had intellectuals like Dewey, and even Margaret Sanger, took her trip to the Soviet Union. They loved her. So yeah, and then fast forward, you see it happening today. And I've said time and time again that, ladies and gentlemen, Russia is not our friend. And if you think they are, you're in for a rude awakening. But so this, like you said, so going back to this whole thing about party loyalty, not trying to get anybody to say, hey, screw the whole two-party system and this, that, and the third. That's not the goal. But the goal is to really tell history and speak about it in an honest way, and just to get people to, to really know and to understand, and more importantly, to really begin to demand more from their politicians, but also to demand more from themselves. Really, I don't know if you agree with
No,
that.
you hit the nail. You hit the nail right on the head. You hit the nail right on the head, because there is no denying that the modern Republican Party leans more to my way of thinking than a Democrat Party. Like, that goes without saying. But what Chuck just said is, like, I couldn't have said it better myself. The reality of it is, when you're a flag waving partisan, when you're a flag waving Republican, and the politicians look at you as, oh, your vote is an easy get. Like, you're going to vote for me regardless, and it doesn't matter what I do in Washington, D.C. It doesn't matter, what I say on a campaign trail. You're Republican, ride or die. Like, when your vote is that easy to get, when your loyalty is that easy to get, these agendas, they get to live on without having any real challenge. But when you're aware of the history, when you're aware of what's at play, when you're aware of this agenda to empower the UN and at the expense of the nation state, when you're aware of this kind of incremental, slow burn agenda to basically abolish the Constitution, quite frankly, you know what kind of questions to ask those who seek your vote. You know how to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they are somebody who wants to get back to the edicts of the Constitution, or someone who wants to dismantle it, quite frankly, because they come in both Republican and Democrat. And so when you look at somebody like a George Herbert Walker Bush, who we point out in episode 11, when you look at, a lot of the people like Goldwater was trying to warn us against, and others, it's not so much that we are looking for a more quote unquote radical Republican Party. It's just that we want to get back to some sense of preserving the Republic. It is really what it boils down to, because a nation state is a good thing, right? I mean, the fact is, yes, after the Tower of Babel fell, after it collapsed, man was dispersed about the earth and went on to set up for themselves nations, distinguishable nations. And this isn't a live and let live mentality, because Christ will come and live a perfect life, die on a cross, be risen again in 3 days, and then he would ascend. And so in his ascension, we need not do nothing else but repent and follow him, and we are ascended with him to the heavens, right? We don't need to build a tower. We don't need to build something out of an ideology, a secular, godless ideology, be it social justice or whatever the case may be. We don't need to build that and to strive for that when we have Christ, when we have the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who we ascend with in his ascension, if that makes sense. And so that doesn't mean either that we neglect our responsibility on the earth, on this side of heaven. We still have a responsibility, and that includes the electoral process. But when you have people like King, who says, you know what, we can make heaven on earth, we can bring it back, we can bring it down to earth, and we can erect, by way of social justice, world peace. We can erect, by way of social justice, brotherhood, the beloved community, and all these other words that they use. King called himself a help me out here, Chuck. He called himself a citizen of the world. This is what King called himself.
Yeah.
Citizen of the world. This sounds like harmless rhetoric, but listen to what he's saying. Citizen of the world. Like, King didn't really believe in borders all that much. He kind of championed himself, or lauded himself rather, as a champion of third world movements. Yeah, he said that there's a revolution underway. There's a revolution that's going on in the world. The poor and the downtrodden and the marginalized around the world are rising up And he says that America is the one that kind of birthed this revolutionary spirit by way of the War of Independence. And now we're reneging and telling other nations that they can't rise up and rebel and revolutionize. He said that we need to get on the right side of the world revolution. So he's talking fast and loose because the revolution that was underway was in fact a Marxist revolution.
Exactly.
He's saying we need to side with that because the world revolution was in fact a Soviet revolution. It was to Sovietize the globe. That's what it was all about. And that's what King is aligning himself with. This is reminiscent of the Tower of Babel, quite frankly. It's not, repent and to lay yourself bare before the cross. That's your only way. We read in the book of Acts that there's only one name given under heaven by which man can be saved. That name, of course, is Christ. Right? And so we don't need to build a political Tower of Babel thinking that's going to bring about nirvana, thinking that's going to yield utopia, thinking it's going to yield world peace when we have the Prince of Peace. And so I say all that to say that when it comes to political partisanship, we might be voting for people who, unbeknownst to us, are part of a conspiracy, part of an agenda that's in keeping with what Herbert Walker Bush was trying to do. That's in keeping with what King was trying to do. That is in keeping with people who are trying to do over the course of American history, irrespective of party. We might be unwitting participants in that. And that's not a sin. It's not a sin to vote for the wrong person. Not a sin to vote for somebody not knowing who they really are. But at the same time, we should understand the history so we can be more informed voters and know the kind of questions that need to be asked of these people who seek our vote. So it's not the two-party system is terrible and da-da-da-da-da. It's not that. It's not this kind of black pill nihilistic view. It's hey, you have this republic if you can keep it. And you can't keep it if you don't know the right questions to ask.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
All right, so we're going to get to these super chats, but before did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I meant to mention this a while ago earlier in the conversation because somebody in the comment section made a comment. They said that something about how long Marxism has been in the United States, which we cover in the docuseries as well, and going all the way back to the Jamestown, and we talk about that stuff and how they tried to put together these communes and whatnot. But they mentioned the 1860s and Karl Marx and his influence on American politics in the 1860s, which is something that we also cover. We also talk about, which is why we spend we talk about it in the series, but Chad and I have done live streams where we've dedicated entire whole conversations to the Civil War and what were its actual motivations and what Lincoln and the Republicans were actually up to. So maybe down the line, maybe a documentary will come out in the future about that. But it's something that we have talked about, which is why Chad gets accused of being an apologist for the Confederacy, because I am of the opinion, and I think Chad is as well, that the Confederacy was it was right. The Confederacy had a right to do what it did, and it wasn't slavery was not the core issue of what led to the war between the states. And yes, there were a lot of Marx or just a lot of these ideas were really behind a lot of what was motivating many at the time, particularly a lot of your pro big government. I guess you can call them federalists, for lack of a better term, in the North. So we're familiar with that history. But I just wanted to put that out there that we dealt with that too a little bit. Are you muted, Shaq? I don't know if you.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. So yeah, thank you for that insight. So I do want to play one more clip that is related, but also unrelated to the MLK Project. and get your reaction to it, Chuck, before you get to the supers and land the plane here. Slot 3.
How do we get back to racial progress in America? Should we be talking about race less? Do we stop talking about it more because of what's going on? Like, how do we acknowledge the mistakes of the past, but then like unite and move forward in a positive way? Is there a chance we could do this?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 steps to it. One has been partly achieved, and that is to get race wherever possible out of the law, to get racial discrimination out of the law.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the elements of the Trump administration I've supported, as well as the Supreme Court decision against affirmative action that is imperfectly enforced, but still nonetheless a really good signal.
Mm-hmm.
It just creates an endless cycle of legitimate racial grievances from different groups, right? And that's the most dangerous situation, is several groups that think they are victims for different valid reasons. So that's one step. Each new generation is an opportunity to get it right. And what I think we need to, how we need to be educating our kids is to understand that first, their default setting is probably good, and all they need is a little bit of extra reinforcement on treating people kindly no matter what they look like, a little bit of Martin Luther King, I have a dream, content of character as the norm, right? On Martin Luther King Day at school, and that's it. They don't need Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram Kendi. They don't need White Fragility for kids.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there is a whole class of people that have been educated at like teaching colleges and pretty highly progressive institutions that believe kids need to be actively inculcated to think about race more often, which is not true.
Sounds like a religion. It's like it's against their original sin, huh? That's crazy.
Yeah. And so that's like the cultural intervention that needs to happen. And then the third thing is, like, ultimately, I think when the economy is doing well and when people feel they have good prospects and good schools, that lowers tension inherently. So we've got to figure out how experiments in charter and public schools can improve lives for poor people regardless of race. And disproportionately that would help Black people and Hispanics, but not on that basis. And the fundamentals of the American economy have to be sound: low unemployment and yearly growth, and all of that stuff helps.
So just to kind of frame this up here, Coleman Hughes has said on a number of occasions that he's a humanist. So he's coming from a humanist point of view. He said also that he doesn't believe in race-based policies. He believes in class-based policies. And so when he lays out his 3 phases of getting America back up and running, number 1 being the elimination of, well, phase 1 and phase 3 kind of coincides in Coleman Hughes's mind. Namely, that getting race out of politics, because we're supposed to be a class-based society, not a race-based society. And 3 being, to the extent that we can get the economy back up and running. He's, of course, talking about something reminiscent of equitable policies that seek to kind of rejigger the system to give those who are below a certain income bracket a leg up by kind of dishing out policies that are targeted toward them. So these kind of redistributive policies. And then phase 2 being, teach King, but don't teach Ibram X. Kendi, because everybody's basically good. We just have to basically help them along and teaching them people like King and steering them clear of people like Kendi. So all of this, once again, is coming from a humanist view. So I don't know. Do you care to respond to that at all, Chuck, and maybe even give us a definition of what humanism is?
Well, yeah. There's a lot of different types of humanism. You kind of break it up into these different theoretical schools, if you will. Humanism, broadly, is this idea that we as human beings, we can sort of I guess, rationalize through, material means, within the purview of our own limited faculties, we can kind of bring about a more ideal and just society, apart from our, silly superstitious traditions that are rooted in the Abrahamic faiths and whatnot. That's kind of like the gist of it. Although, when you again start getting into the philosophical weeds of the concept of humanism, it does get a bit more convoluted. But for the sake of time, we don't necessarily need to go there. But again, it will always, lead itself into
Well,
political.
real quick, Chuck. And I don't know how long your reaction to what I'm about to say is going to be, or how brief it's going to be. Take your time. I have plenty of time. I know you got to get up early. But the basic, most elementary description of what humanism is, when you look at, for example, the Humanist Manifesto, which was co-signed by the likes of John Dewey and others, the basic concept of it is mankind can be good and civilized without God.
Yeah.
That mankind, that first of all, it posits first and foremost that there is no God, that man created God, and since man created a quote unquote perfect and good God, the man has it within himself to be the kind of epitome of what it is he created, of building civilization, of progressing technologically and morally and so on. Humanists take credit for the ending of slavery in the Western Hemisphere. They take credit for a number of different things, that it is their kind of brainchild that gave rise to moral progress in the Western Hemisphere. And so this basic concept that we can be good without God, the reason I kind of pick that out in particular, Chuck, is because it kind of coincides with what you said in the clip as it pertains to Lenin.
Yeah.
So yeah, like with that kind of caveat to humanism, I want to give you the floor to continue to explain it.
I mean, absolutely. It's just kind of you're taking a word and you're saying it in a slightly different way. But all these things, quote unquote Marxism, I mean, it bears the name of one of the co-authors of the Communist Manifesto. But all of these various ideas, from humanism to Darwinism, right? All these different ideas that came about subsequently, for worse in this case, in the wake of the Enlightenment, talking 1700s, late 1700s. All these ideas that man, we thought that, oh wow, we didn't understand that there were limits to our understanding, and as a result, we kind of got filled with so much hubris, as it were. Hubris is one of the Greek gods in ancient Greek mythology, but nevertheless, we kind of got so high on ourselves that we've forgotten that that without God, without God, a lot of these secular, the secularizing influence of our society, it wouldn't be possible without the religious ideas that birth this secular age. And it's not the fault, so to speak, of God in any way. Of course, it all lies at the feet of man, because it's the ancient Greek tragedy, right? It's like, no matter what it is that we do as human beings, right, we would always fail, because life in and of itself is it's a tragedy, and the burden is the flesh. The burden is to be a human being, in the fall of man and all the things that come along with that. But absolutely, like you said, and I didn't quote from the Humanist Manifesto, but like I said, the liberal idea is predicated upon this notion that human beings, that, you know, when what was the king that said the arc of humanity or something like that, the arc of history bends towards justice, right? Well, the idea of liberalism is that we as human beings, that the arc that we naturally bend toward progression, whatever that means, right? That begs the question, well, what does it mean to progress? Where are we going and what are we leaving behind, right? Are we leaving behind such vital components that we need and that we should cherish, which is why we are here, right, in the first place? But the idea that if we can unshackle ourselves from the burdens of our superstitious past and leave it up to man, then we can discover things that have never been discovered, that we are putting limitations on ourselves because we as human beings, we sort of see ourselves as less than. And this, when you read Marx, especially when you go into the letters that he wrote to his father, especially when you go into his poems, there's this envy, there's this vitriolic hatred for God, simply for the fact that God is God and man is not, or more importantly, he is not. And like you said, Chad, when you a constant theme you hear within Marx's literature is this theme of alienation. And this is what Marx means when he speaks about alienation, not just from an economic standpoint, as man being alienated from his labor through the labor market and in the commodification of his of the goods that he produces with his own labor. He becomes alienated from his ideals vis-a-vis the creation of a God that is created in the likeness of his image and not vice versa. And so therefore, as you mentioned, man is capable of achieving the ultimate good, because if we created God, then we know how we ought to be in the world, because, right, God is us. He is a projection of our own ideals, right? And that in essence is where, I don't want to muddy the waters and get, you know, into Hegel, because Hegel was a bit of a theosophist, and he had these ideas about how ideas are formed. And of course, Marx would take Hegel's ideas and turn them upside down and come up with this materialistic idea that Hegel didn't necessarily talk about. But yeah, that was Marx. This idea that mankind doesn't need God because he, in fact, is God. He's simply forgotten who he really is. He's forgotten that power. Right. And this is especially keen, you know, you hear it amongst a lot of Black supremacists about the inherent quality of not only what it means to be an oppressed person, as the moral high ground always belongs to the person who is in fact the victim, right? This goes into the legal theories and philosophies of someone, say, like a Derek Bell, which, you know, I don't know if we have time to get into Derek Bell during this conversation. But you hear these ideas amongst a lot of Black supremacists out there that there is this inherent quality, right, about being Black that kind of makes us superior in a way, almost godlike, right, Chad? And so it's up to us to push and take us into this, you know, new paradigm, because the moral high ground lies with us. And so it's
somebody said this is wild history, and it is. I agree, but it's important to know. Chuck, I'm actually a bit surprised you didn't speak at all about Coleman Hughes saying to teach King but not Kendi.
I was going to get to that because I forgot how we even got here. We were both kind of talking. I was like, yeah, what was the clip that we were just watching? Because you kind of stole my thunder, because you mentioned that King. I mean that Coleman Hughes is. I mean, he says he's not a Christian, right? He's not a believer. He's not I don't think, you know, he's not a theist of any kind, right? And so I find it interesting when he says that, well, we need to mention King, and we need to camp out on King's assertion about racial equality and content of character and all that stuff. He doesn't mention all of the other stuff. I don't even think that he said in that clip that acknowledging that he knows is there, albeit we should ignore it. We just need to focus on that part of King. But it goes back to something that you always said, Chad, that King is not, right? He's not some saint. He's not the arbiter. He's not the standard he's certainly not the standard for ethical conduct, but he isn't even the standard in terms of how what he espoused and what he taught and what he said from the pulpit and in other places, right? The ultimate example, of course, is Christ. And it's interesting, given the fact that it's quite ironic, given the fact that King was allegedly a man of the cloth. It's so ironic, but Coleman Hughes doesn't say that, never mind, because he doesn't talk about how these things are to occur. Or in other words, what the cost of these things are. When I say cost, it doesn't necessarily have to be a dollar amount, right? Cost can come in a myriad of different ways. But he says that talking about the economy and the education and this and that. Well, those are all fanciful ideas, Coleman, but how are all these things going to come about? How do these things even work? Yeah, he doesn't say, at least in that clip, he doesn't say. But remember, in the docuseries, Chad, when there were moments during episode 11 in particular, where I think it was John Conyers. No, it wasn't Conyers. It may have been him and someone else, and they were talking about when it gets to the point where we go over the King holiday being enshrined in the 80s, and this is seen as some big celebration. But the people who were in favor of it said explicitly, it's not simply about enshrining King as this great American hero and this and that. It's about that, and also a reminder that we have to continue to pursue all of the things that King set out to do in his life. And so that's what the enshrining of the King holiday does. It's not simply about him and who he was. It is a constant reminder that this is what King is, this is who he was and what he did, and his mission was left unfinished. And it is up to us, and I mean all people involved or wherever, not just Black folks, not just this and that, but all Americans, to make sure that we create the kind of America that King envisioned. And so when Coleman Hughes says that, you can't just stay there, because King is bigger than just that. He's all of those other things. So that goes to Delano and to everyone else. Those other things cannot be ignored. That's a part of it, Chad, and that's why they want the acceptance of King, because when you accept him, you have to bring all the other baggage with you. Because that is the most important aspect of King's life, not the racial stuff. It's the stuff that history has subsequently downplayed. And then we're all kind of sitting around wondering, Chad, saying, how the heck do we even, how did we get here?
Yeah. And just for clarification, you said that, the real goal, as Conyers explains, is to move America, not just to get the King holiday passed, but to move America in the direction that King wanted to go. What is that direction?
Let's see. Greater centralized authority for the federal government. You have these open-ended platitudes like, social justice. Right? So what exactly does that mean, right? A society where everyone has equal outcomes, but more importantly, a society where everyone is treated equally. Now, Chad, this is a very interesting part of the conversation here, because this is something that you've spoken out about, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. That where do we get this idea that everyone ought to be treated the same, even? You know what I mean? And who's going to go about the business of policing this and making sure that you treat every individual the same, as if the federal government has the right to tell you who is deserving of your time and your resources and so on and so forth. I mean, some people just might not make the cut for whatever reason, but that's your decision, because how we organize ourselves within our society, of course, is a moral question, and that's where the whole concept of self-governance comes from, right? It's an internal kind of thing where we, kind of cultivate, right, the kind of uh, virtue wherein we are able to impose a kind of discipline upon ourselves for the purpose of the common good. At least that was the original idea. But to go back more specifically to your question, it is quite literally to Sovietize, to create a kind of a communist state, here in America. Race, Chad, as you mentioned in the docuseries, race was the first phase of it, if you will, or at least during the time of King's heyday. And once once the civil rights movement kind of gained its legitimacy, then it would take on the look of the kind of multi-ethnic, multiracial conglomerate that was now going to then focus more so on the quote-unquote class issue that Coleman Hughes seems to think is the primary organizing mechanism of our society, this kind of economic or class inequality. And so, Chad, when you mentioned in social justice, I mean, who know you're talking about a lot of things, because there are a whole lot of folk who got grievances out here nowadays, as we can see.
Yeah, and that's my issue with the whole. Sorry, go ahead.
And then the last thing I'll just say that you have, and I'm not trying to keep picking on Delano Squires or anything like that, but Delano would say such things as well. You say that King is this and that, but I could never see King in favor of the modern day LGBT is this and that. If King would stand for that as a Christian man, as a pastor, as above, it's like, well, yeah, he would. Yeah, he would.
He absolutely would.
He absolutely would.
And that's part of my issue with the whole reparations argument, which something you just said, kind of at the tail end of your statement there, namely that everybody has a grievance. To the extent that you set the precedence for, we're going to start going back into history, take a kind of Marxified version of this or that event, and then come up with a nominal number as to how we're going to disperse those who we deem affected by this or that thing. What that then does is opens up the floodgates for everybody to then come in and say, well, what about my grievance? And what about my grievance? And what about my grievance? To try to retroactively make right what you feel was wrong. And so, that's, I mean, I have a whole, I guess, breakdown of why I'm against reparations, but that's only part of it. So, anyway, let's get to these supers. Thank you. Let's see here. I can't see that. It's yellow. I don't like why they choose yellow as a Dayon, $10. Please, or peace to my big brothers. Miss chopping it up with you guys. Thank you, Dayon. Thank you for the super. Really appreciate it. I'm having to blow up the screen to read these with that yellow background. So forgive me if I'm taking too long to get to them. Let me try to close this one out. We got another one from, what's that say? C Sparks.
$15. This says 10.
C Sparks. Thank you, C Sparks, for the super. Really appreciate it. Let's see. That's also yellow. All right, let me try to blow this up. Got another one from John F. $10 says, I appreciate you guys speaking the truth of the communist influence behind the civil rights movement. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you. I feel like I haven't done a live in forever.
You've been working, brother.
I know you've been in these live stream streets.
I'd say a little bit, man. I like to come on Keisha King show and have a little fun from time to time,
Got one for what is that, Arkansas? $2. Free Blanche. Yo, shout out to Chad and Chuck. Big ups. Thank you. Shout out to Blanche Robinson. I always get Robinson and Robertson confused. Let's see. Got some others. Hopefully I'm not skipping any. This one is from Willie Doc, $5. Says, blessings, Chad and Chuck. Just recently ordered the complete DVD set of the MLK Project. Thank you for your God-honoring work and exposing darkness. Yeah, we're gonna keep at it and release some more documentaries that I think you all will like. So be on the lookout for those. Chuck and I, our work is not done yet. We got $4 from DT. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Let's see. This one's a long one. $10 from Dylan Biggs. Says, if you ever do a docuseries on McCarthy, you should check out a gentleman by the name of Razor Fist. Am I reading that right? Razor Fist. He did a video essay vindicating the senator. He did a video on on communism in Hollywood as well. Razor Fist. I'm gonna have to look him up. Yeah, I mean, Chuck is also a wealth of knowledge on McCarthy, that whole era, HUAC, the Senate committee as well. So yeah, I mean, Chuck and I have been talking about doing a McCarthy documentary. So maybe that will be in the works before long.
I
mean, if I can get more commentators, I mean, I'm not gonna knock it.
I know who Razor Fist is. I haven't watched a ton of his content, but I'm familiar with him. You know, I hear good things, but I don't, I can't vouch for him personally because I haven't watched a ton. But I've seen a couple of things. I've seen him around. Seems like he does good work, especially like you say when it comes to communism and Hollywood. How it began to infiltrate Hollywood in the 30s. I have a lot of knowledge about that as well. Yeah, about that.
Be sure to look him up. Alethea 846, $5 super sticker. Thank you. Really appreciate it. I think that covers all of them. Nope, somebody just dropped another one. Let's see here. Sir Tice, $10. Salute Chuck and Chad. This was a very informative and enjoyable show. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll be doing live streams more often now that the MLK Project is over and done with. Real quick while I have you, Chuck. I know you got to go.
No. I'm here, bro. I'm here.
So when I was in the midst of doing long backbreaking hours of editing the MLK Project, trying to make sure it's all nice and right for you all, somebody sent me a live stream of this pastor who wears flat brim hats, much like yourself. Well, I don't think you wear flat brim hats, do you?
No.
You wear fitted hats. But this pastor out of California, he did a live stream where they were discussing yours truly in the MLK Project. And he brought up the Grenada Project. And he's like, yeah, I bet Chad doesn't cover the Grenada Project in his docuseries. And I saw that and I was like, man, I want to react to this, but I have so much work to do with the MLK Project. I mean, people on Patreon, you all know better than anyone because y'all were really pressing me to get it released, get 9, 10, 11 released. And it just took some time to make sure that everything was suitable to be released. So the production just had to be right. I've been in the dungeon for the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, just trying to crank this out. So once I finished episode 11, I was like, okay, now I can react to this video. So I did a reaction to the video, and it's on my YouTube. You can go to YouTube or Chad Jackson. It's probably one of the last videos I uploaded where I'm reacting to this live stream, specifically as it pertains to the Grenada Project. So then Homeboy does another live stream, and somebody asks him, "Hey, have you seen Chad O. Jackson's response?" And he goes, "Yeah, he took 3 months to reply to it, though. He probably spent all that 3 months, trying to figure out a way to respond to me and do his research." Like, no. Like, I would have gladly responded to you in real time. I just had too much work to do. But I just thought that was fascinating. Did you see that response?
Yeah, well, I saw your response. I watched the video. I watched the live Q&A you did dealing with it. First of all, the fact of the matter is that's irrelevant. I mean, you see the sleight of hand, the way he's trying to misdirect, trying to mock you for taking too long to respond, as if the issue isn't the merit of your argument. Were you right or were you wrong? I don't care if it took me 3 years to respond. I said, well, dang, I did the Grenada Project. I was completely unfamiliar with that. Let me look into it. And it took you, 3 weeks, 3 months or whatever. And then you finally put the video. Okay, well, address what he actually said instead of talking about how long it took him to respond. But ego, man. I mean, what can you say, bro? I guess.
What did you make of Leon Hall and all of them?
I thought first of all, it's hilarious listening to you mock him. But yeah, man. I mean, it's what you would expect, because this is what they were doing. This is what the civil rights apparatus was doing. They would get leaders in these communities, and they would do things as simple as they would go into a random business, especially if it was a white-owned business, and they would just look at the employee demographics, and if it wasn't reflective of the local population, then they would make it extremely hard for these businesses to function. They would quite literally do things that were illegal. They would obstruct entrances. They would harass. They would intimidate, harass, molest, and batter patrons to scare them off.
They did the same thing with the Montgomery bus boycott, by the way.
Yep, they did
trying to scare blacks into not getting on the buses. In fact, King himself bragged to CLR James about this. About how they use intimidation to scare colored people from riding the buses.
They did this all over the country, from coast to coast, and this was supposedly a flex. You wonder why. Like you mentioned, talking about Grenada, Mississippi as a quote unquote food desert. After after these businesses were deliberately chased out and ran out of business. You had examples of this, for example, in the Bay Area, the home of the Black Panther Party, its first chapter, right? Although, you can make the case that the ideas of the Black Panthers were these ideas, of course, were seeded elsewhere. But the Black Panthers, for example, and I think it's fair to mention them because we do cover them in this episode. A lot of people like to say, well, one of the good positive things they did was, they did the free breakfast program for the kids in the community. But they did so vis-a-vis extortion. They extorted businesses. Went to them. Just. It was racketeering, straight up mob style intimidation tactics, where local businesses were bullied into donating a certain amount of their their property, their wealth, the things that they would sell to the program in order to try and clean up the image of the party. And if you didn't do so, if you didn't give enough according to how much the Panthers felt that you should have given, store owners were assaulted in some instances, especially when it came to some of the more less reputable businesses. When it came to the underground economy, if you will, a lot of the individuals involved were were murdered, killed by members of the Black Panther Party, for example. But this was all a part of their their efforts to help improve and empower the Black community. They extorted them, and like I said, groups like the Black Panther Party learned these kinds of tactics from these civil rights apparatus like the SCLC and SNCC and other organizations. I forgot the Urban League and other such organizations that preceded them. So this was coast to coast, man.
Right. Well, that's a great place to end it, Chuck. I can talk to you for hours, and we do have a lot more to cover. So I'll definitely be inviting you back.
Oh yeah,
before long.
man.
Like I said, I'm definitely going to be doing more live streams, and I'll try to give you plenty of a heads up just to see what your availability is. So.
Oh yeah, man. Let's get it, man. Because this is episode 11, man. It was 3 hours, bro. So we got a lot to cover, man. I wanted to speak to all. Hopefully, in the future, you and I can discuss a lot of what took place in higher education after King's assassination. And
yeah, we did touch on that in the episode 11, didn't we?
Yeah,
but there's so much to expound upon too, huh?
Yeah, we spent time, like I said earlier in our conversation, talking about Derek Bell and critical legal studies, which morphed into critical race theory and DEI, and how the whole civil rights movement is responsible for all of that. The SNCC and the Panthers and the partnership between Angela Davis and Abernathy and the SCLC and Coretta Scott King. And we didn't have time to go into Angela Davis and what actually took place.
Right.
That led to the trial of Angela Davis and what
because that's a documentary in itself.
It's a documentary of itself and what she was actually wrapped up in. Very, very interesting. And how in the world could Reverend Ralph Abernathy align himself with this woman, and knowing the company that she kept and what she actually did and what she was involved in and why she was actually acquitted. She wasn't acquitted because she didn't do it. Yeah, man. And to hear James Baldwin say that they're simply going after Angela Davis because she's trying to educate the people and trying to enlighten them and whatnot.
He was a weirdo.
Wasn't he though? But yeah, there's a lot, man. The New World Order stuff that I found it very interesting, talking about Reagan's presidency and his relationship to George Herbert Walker Bush. You mentioned how all of the political predictors and analysts were of the opinion that Reagan was going to choose Gerald Ford, and at the last minute he stepped in and chose George Herbert Walker Bush. And it's like, why did he do that? Knowing Herbert Walker Bush's ties to certain entities and the CIA and the whole thing, and even there's a popular belief out there, Chad, amongst some there's a popular conspiracy out there that, of course, John Hinckley, Reagan's would-be assassin, actually has connections to the Bush family, and it was in fact George Herbert Walker Bush who planned the assassination of his own president. Very, 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 it's interesting, but I'm not saying I believe it. But I just think it's very interesting that you deal a lot with what was going on in the 1980s and what may have been going on right underneath President Reagan's nose or behind his back from within his own party.
Yeah.
And why did he choose George Herbert Walker Bush? George Herbert Walker Bush did not have a lot of nice things to say about Reagan.
Right. Even on the campaign trail.
Even on the campaign trail, yeah. You can chalk it up to politics as usual, but was it really? And what were their forces perhaps pushing Ronald Reagan, not to kind of lionize Reagan and say he's not without his flaws, but were there forces around him that were leading him in a direction that he didn't want to go? And if so, why? And what sort of leverage, if any, did they have over him? These are very interesting questions. Very interesting indeed.
Yeah, and a lot of these things are really documentaries that you can make kind of as spin-offs that delve deeper into various branches of the bigger picture. Because to your point, whether it pertains to Angela Davis and Black Power, more insight into Reagan's administration and this kind of juxtaposition between him and his vice president, and things that were just going on around the world as the Soviet Union was entering into a new phase. These are stories that are very, like, to know them and to come across this information, it really does give you kind of a different insight into the kind of surface level Republican v. Democrat political scene, as it were. Especially when you look at the fact that since FDR, most of our presidents have kind of kept the ball moving, if you will, in a singular direction, irrespective of party. That's a fascinating thing in itself.
Man. The Soros angle, and I mean, and there have always been, big time, mega wealthy folks involved in this kind of backdoor dealing between the United States and its enemy, the Soviet Union, throughout the 20th century. And a lot of individuals and working within and with the support of various organizations, from the YMCA to the Red Cross. Oh yeah, man, it's a deep history. George Soros was not the first of his kind. They've been doing this for a long time. A lot of these individuals had connections with every administration, from Woodrow Wilson's administration to all the way up through to where we are today. So it's a very...
You say Woodrow Wilson, and I said FDR. Isn't it the case that it actually goes probably back to Teddy?
Yeah. I would say so.
But that's an entire century or more.
Yeah, that's an entire century. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was a big... he was a progressive. By his own admission. He believed in a big...
I would argue Lincoln. But...
With me, like I said in the past, when we come on these shows, I always say that Lincoln was he was our first. Yeah, he was the country's first progressive, perhaps. But that's what's so fascinating, Chad, is this: from the moment the country got started, the debate was on, and it just never stopped. And the problem is that it seems as though when it comes to every major moment in American history, it seems as though the wrong side, I guess, just sort of keeps on winning. But yes, Lincoln was a big time progressive. I always say that Reconstruction was America's first progressive era.
Yeah. Well, obviously we could go on, but we'll leave it there. I'll be uploading this to Patreon, but thank you all for showing up tonight. I wasn't expecting to have this many people watching, especially after having not gone live for so long. I'm looking at 430 people watching the live stream right now. That's not bad for not going live in forever. So anyway, I love you all. God bless. Thank you for watching.